Everyone has questions when it comes to their wedding, especially given COVID. So today we're doing a wedding Q&A and talking all about wedding vendors and working with them. Hi there, I'm Jamie Chang, your destination wedding planning guru and designer of joy at Mango Muse Events, the creator of Passport to Joy, the step-by-step online wedding planning course for couples, and the founder of Let's I Do This, intimate and virtual weddings in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I share real and honest and useful wedding planning tips, tricks, and advice you can use to help make planning your wedding easier and more joyful so you can create a wedding you love. Because let's face it, wedding planning isn't always easy. In fact, it can be downright painful, and nobody wants that. So we're bringing the joy back to wedding planning. Are you ready? All right, so let's do this. Let's dive in here. Now, today we're doing a little wedding Q&A, if you will, because, everybody has questions. Everybody. And, during these COVID times, you can't help but just have tons of them, like even more than normal. By the way, if you haven't checked out our other videos and our other wedding Q&As, recently we did one about guest communication and about vaccinations. You should definitely check those out and hit subscribe so you can access to all the new ones. But today our wedding Q&A is really centered around wedding vendors and working with them and, and how to do that given certain situations that are coming up quite often now for many couples. So let's start off with question number one. Now, if you booked, say, a venue or vendors prior to COVID, so before COVID even hit, what do you do if you no longer feel like it's safe? So, any couple who really booked anything really before COVID was a thing, this is definitely a possible scenario you just might find yourself in or might be facing. Maybe your venue is an indoor venue and, you just don't feel comfortable having an indoor wedding. Or maybe, you have some type of vendor that you chose, like a band, for example, that you just don't feel safe having anymore at this point. Maybe you have a particular vendor who's told you that they don't plan on getting vaccinated. Now, these are just some of the possible scenarios and issues that you might be facing with a vendor, that you booked, once again, before COVID was even a word, before COVID was even a thing. So, if you're in this situation, it's time to have a conversation with your vendor and talk to them about just what comes next. Now, canceling your contract is, might kind of seem like that's your only choice in this scenario, but it's not necessarily. There's a chance there's another option here. And this other option, means potentially that you won't lose your deposit, you won't lose any money, or have to find someone new, which, is its own ball of wax, right? So, for example, maybe the venue, has an outdoor area that they don't usually use for events, but maybe they'd open it up for you and your wedding. Or maybe they have a sister property that does have outdoor space that could work instead. Maybe your band can play instrumental and not sing, or maybe they all plan on being vaccinated before your wedding. Or maybe, that vendor that doesn't want to get vaccinated, they, will get a negative test before your wedding. Not every situation will necessarily have another option, but it doesn't hurt to have the discussion, to have that talk with the vendor and just see, what's possible. Because it not only benefits you, but it really benefits them as well to continue the relationship and continue the contract. And that way nobody loses any money, right? But what happens if you have to cancel? Well, if you have to cancel, you have to cancel. There's just kind of no way around that. But here's the silver lining. It's important that you feel safe and that your guests feel safe. And that's more important than moving forward with something that, could be uncomfortable just for everyone. Okay? All right, let's move on to question number 2, which is, what do you do, if your vendors aren't getting back to you? So sadly, this is kind of a common occurrence, not just during COVID, but normal times as well. Sometimes you'll book a vendor and they'll be great. And then once you've, signed the contract and put down the deposit, it just seems like they sort of fallen off the face of the earth. You email and get nothing, you call and get nothing, and it's just kind of like they disappeared almost. And this has become more common since COVID has hit. But let's talk about the COVID situation first, and then we'll talk about sort of the quote unquote normal situation. So, when COVID hit and everything got postponed and canceled, a lot of vendors just kind of stopped working on their business. In some cases, they had to focus on just other sources of income to survive or getting another job, even in order to just support their families. In other cases, they took time off to take care of someone else, whether it's a parent or a grandparent or their kids. Everyone had kids at home this last year, right? And for others, they may have gotten sick or someone close to them got sick and they've just been dealing with all things, medical and COVID. So there are certainly, these are just some examples. There are certainly other situations, I'm sure, as well. The point here really is just that, lives and businesses really got upended, right, when COVID hit, and this includes all your wedding vendors. So the lack of response might be a function of something COVID related. Now, I'm not excusing their behavior because, they should be getting back to you, even if it isn't quite as quickly as it would be normally. But this could explain why they're slow and why they may have seemed to have disappeared. They may just not have the capability to respond right now, given their situation. So one thing you can do is check their social media. If they haven't posted recently, which is probably likely if they're not responding to you, then something's probably going on. Maybe one of the situations I just mentioned, or something else completely. And if they have been posting the social media, then that they're around, and then that means they should be getting back to you. But if they're not responding and your wedding isn't happening soon, and when I say soon, I mean, you have at least 4 to 6 months before the wedding, then, give them some time to respond. They may be planning to get back to all of their clients, once it gets closer to the wedding date. Once again, everyone's situation's a little different and everyone's handling different things going on right now. So they may have a plan. It's not that they're purposefully ignoring you. They just aren't handling emails right now or something. But if your wedding is planning on taking place sooner, sooner than that 4 to 6 months and plus out, I'd really start following up constantly. And you want to do this via phone and email, and you can increase the frequency the more you do it. So, you can start off with something like once a week and move it to twice a week, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This sort of poking and or harassment, which is, maybe not the right word, but the right gist that you're getting here, the poking should get them moving in the right direction. Sometimes you just unfortunately have to be that squeaky wheel. You have to be that person who just keeps prodding and prodding and prodding. And, once again, you shouldn't have to be this, but sometimes this is just what it takes to get a response. But at some point, if you haven't heard from them, I'd start sending some final serious communication indicating that you do want to terminate the contract and that relationship, given their lack of communication. You can also, in this case, request your deposit back. Now, it's possible this whole thing might turn really ugly. It's, there are definitely situations where that happens and, lawyers might have to get involved, but hopefully that won't happen. And it'll get resolved one way or the other. The poking will result in them getting back to you and everything's good, or them getting back to you and yes, you do need to terminate or whatever. It should hopefully resolve itself some way. Now, if we're talking non-COVID times, okay, then a slow response might be a function of them just being really busy. They're in maybe the middle of their wedding season and they're just swamped with current weddings. So your future wedding is sort of put on a little bit of the back burner until they have more time to focus on it. Now, once again, they should still not be ignoring you, but this might explain the slowness in response. Now, in this case, you want to follow sort of the same steps, like in the COVID example, and follow up, but give it, a little less time. Make a decision to terminate a vendor relationship sooner. So, in the case of COVID, I do think it's important to be really forgiving because we just don't know what another person's situation is. And things are just, we love this word, but it's just unprecedented. It really is. So you want to be a little forgiving. But in normal times, if it's been a month or more of just constant reaching out and poking, with no response, it's really time to ditch them, sadly. And while I know that can hurt, if they aren't getting back to you, you're in a much better situation if you do fire them, if you do terminate that relationship, because that's not the vendor you want to be working with anyway. And that can show its ugly face come your wedding day too. So if they're not taking care of you during this planning process, and you've given them enough of a leeway to respond, then it's time to move on. All right, that's question number 2. Question number 3 is, what happens if you have to postpone again, like a second or third or fourth time? Now, unfortunately, this is also a common occurrence, sadly. And if you're in this situation, you're also probably getting pretty good at postponing. Not that that's necessarily something you want to get good at, but it is what it is. Now, vendors as a whole have been really flexible when it comes to postponing during these COVID times because, everyone understands what's going on. But after a certain point, from a business perspective, a business standpoint, they just might not be able to move your date without charging some type of fee. Now, this is partially because of, that future date and the future business they might lose out on because of your postponement. But it also is because, prices generally increase yearly. And so after a certain point, they can't honor that 2 years old price anymore. And that change in pricing has to be calculated into it. So if you're postponing multiple times, you need to expect higher prices for the products and the services and or a change fee to move that date. But it's also important to know that, they may not be available on your new date, maybe at all, which means that you might have to cancel. And in that process, lose your deposit as well. Now, keep in mind that, the more vendors that you have and the more times you postpone, the higher likelihood that, there will be vendors who just won't be able to accommodate that change. But don't despair. Losing a deposit does suck. And if it has to happen, it has to happen. But the silver lining, and this is the silver lining, is that this might also be a good opportunity for you to book a different vendor that maybe you really originally wanted, but maybe they were booked, or someone new that you've discovered along the way since you first started booking your vendors that you like more. So this is also a chance to perhaps work with someone else, which could be a really good thing in the end. Okay? All right, those are our vendor questions for today. And now I have a question for you. What is your question? It could be about vendors, it could be about COVID, it could be about anything. Let me know in a comment below, and we might answer it in an upcoming video. And if you enjoyed today's video, please like it, give us some thumbs up. You can check out our other wedding planning videos for even more tips, and please hit subscribe so you can get access to all the new ones. And if you're looking for help through the entire wedding planning process, please check out Passport to Joy. You can find all the links below because you deserve to enjoy your engagement no matter what your budget is, and even in the middle of a pandemic. Thanks so much for being here, and I'll see you next time.